Caroline's body lay lifeless, her face buried into a pillow as her baby cried nearby, completely unaware of the horror happening around her. The house was in disarray, and their family dog, Roxy, hung from a railing, strangled to death. To anyone who saw the scene, it screamed of a brutal home invasion. Except there were no intruders. The real monster was right there, playing the part of the devastated husband. This is the horrifying story of Babis Anagnostopoulos, the man who deceived everyone, even the FBI, into believing his lies. I'll take you through the twisted case of how he nearly got away with murder. I truly could not believe how deep the deception ran in this case. The fairy tale beginning. Caroline Crouch was a bright and lively young girl with big dreams. At just 15 years old, she was busy with school, friends, and the joys of teenage life. Then she met Babis Anagnostopoulos, a 27-year-old helicopter pilot. He swept her off her feet in a way that seemed straight out of a storybook. Babis made a grand gesture by flying a helicopter over Caroline's school, capturing her heart with his charm and adventurous spirit. It was the kind of moment that could make any young girl feel like a princess. Their romance blossomed quickly. Just a year and a half after they met, Babis proposed to Caroline. Even though she was still underage, they decided to elope, getting married in Portugal when she turned 18. The couple appeared to be living a fairy tale life, filled with love and excitement. They shared their journey on social media, showcasing smiling faces and happy moments, which created the illusion of a perfect relationship.
From the outside, it seemed that Caroline and Babis had it all.
Their social media accounts were filled with pictures of adventures, vacations, and family moments, making them seem like the ideal couple. Friends and family admired their love, believing they were living a dream life together. But underneath this shiny surface, trouble was brewing. As I reflect on their story, it is clear that everything seemed perfect from the outside. But as we know, appearances can be deceiving. There were hints of the struggles Caroline faced in her personal life, details that were hidden behind the happy smiles. Her diary entries, which would later come to light, hinted at deep-seated issues in their relationship. They painted a starkly different picture than what their social media portrayed. This contrast between their public image and private reality is often a reminder of how difficult it can be to truly understand what happens behind closed doors. The couple's seemingly fairy tale romance would soon take a dark turn, leading to tragic consequences that shocked everyone who thought they knew them. Life behind closed doors. The life of Caroline Crouch and Babis Anagnostopoulos was not as perfect as it seemed. While they showcased a happy relationship on social media, Caroline's diary told a very different story. Through her handwritten words, we get a glimpse into the troubled life she was living. The contrast between their public image and private struggles is a powerful reminder that we cannot always judge what happens behind closed doors. In her diary, Caroline expressed increasing doubts about her relationship with Babis. She often wrote about their fights, her feelings of being trapped, and thoughts of leaving him. One poignant entry stands out. I love Babis so much that I cannot leave him even though this relationship hurts me. It is clear from these words that her love was intertwined with deep pain and confusion. The struggle between her love for him and the reality of her situation was a heartbreaking conflict that she wrestled with daily. The emotional abuse and manipulation from Babis became evident through Caroline's reflections. Babis controlled many aspects of her life, including their finances. This control was not just about money, it was a way to isolate her from the outside world. Friends and family might have noticed something off, but they could not see the extent of Babis's influence. Caroline felt unable to leave, especially after becoming pregnant. Her desire to provide a stable family for her child made it even harder for her to think about leaving. She believed that staying was in the best interest of her daughter, even if it meant enduring a painful relationship. As I read through her diary entries, it is heartbreaking to think of the emotional turmoil Caroline was living with while the world thought she had the perfect life. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the happiest pictures on social media hide the deepest sorrows. Many people suffer in silence, unable to share their struggles for fear of judgment or disbelief. Caroline's situation is a stark reflection of how complex love can be. It can be beautiful and fulfilling, yet also painful and suffocating. The struggle to balance love and self-preservation is something many people can relate to, even if they do not find themselves in such extreme circumstances. Caroline's story raises important questions about emotional health and the signs of manipulation in relationships. Her diary entries show that while she was trapped in her circumstances, she was still aware of the toxicity surrounding her. Eventually, the reality of Caroline's life serves as a cautionary tale and emphasizes that it is essential to prioritize one's emotional well-being. As the story unfolds, it becomes increasingly evident that the fairy tale life she once seemed to lead was just a facade hiding a much darker truth. The horrific night of May 11th, 2021. That fateful night started like any other in their suburban home outside Athens. Caroline, Babies, and their 11-month-old daughter were asleep, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. The tranquility of their household was shattered by a horrific event that would leave the community in shock. In the early hours, Babies called emergency services. He described a terrifying invasion by 3 masked intruders who had broken into their home. His claims painted a picture of chaos and fear. He said he was tied up while his wife was murdered and their beloved dog was strangled. The scene he created was that of a brutal robbery, with money stolen from their home. However, the graphic details of the crime scene tell a much darker story. When authorities arrived, they found Caroline lying face down on the bed. Beside her, their baby was crying, trying to wake her up. The image of a helpless infant, not fully understanding the tragedy that outspread, is heart-wrenching. The couple's husky puppy had been strangled with a leash, adding to the horror of the situation. The house was ransacked, with signs of a struggle everywhere. A Monopoly box was left open, revealing where the couple had hidden cash. As the police worked at the scene, Babis's initial reaction caught attention. He appeared to be in shock, visibly emotional as he stood near his wife's body. His distress seemed genuine, drawing sympathy from those around him. At that moment, I was completely convinced that Babis was just another victim of a brutal crime. The narrative he presented was compelling, and many people, including investigators, were inclined to believe him. However, as time passed, questions began to arise. The police noticed inconsistencies in Babis's story. Details that seemed solid at first started to unravel. It was strange that a robbery would involve the strangling of a dog and the careful handling of the baby. These aspects did not align with typical criminal behavior. Instead of being a straightforward case, it started to look more compy. The emotional weight of that night affected not only Babies and Caroline's family, but also the entire community. People grieved for the loss of a young mother who had so much life ahead of her. Friends and neighbors found it hard to believe that someone could commit such an act, especially in a neighborhood that felt safe. In the days that followed, as news spread, the focus shifted from the crime itself to the investigation and the man who had presented himself as a grieving husband. Babies was initially seen as a victim, but the more investigators dug into his story, the more they began to question his innocence. This shocking contrast between his public persona and the emerging evidence is something that stays with me. How can someone who appears so devastated be hiding a truth so dark? The complexity of human behavior is often hard to understand, and this case exemplified just how easily appearances can deceive. As the investigation extended, it became clear that the truth was more twisted than anyone could have imagined. The scene of the crime would lead to revelations that no one expected, turning a tragic murder into a gripping tale of deception and manipulation. The investigation and early theories. After the horrific night, the police quickly began their investigation. Babis was a key witness, and all eyes were on him as they tried to piece together what happened. His account of the events guided the initial steps of the inquiry. Investigators listened carefully to every detail he shared about the supposed attack. They started with the belief that professional criminals were involved, based on his description of the intruders. Babies painted a picture of a terrifying home invasion, leading the police to suspect that it was a robbery gone wrong. To support their investigation, the police created a sketch based on Babis's identification of one of the intruders. It looked menacing, which only fueled the community's fear. The thought that dangerous criminals were roaming free made people uneasy. Some investigators even speculated that the intruders might have been high on drugs. This theory seemed plausible, given the chaos of the crime scene. Additionally, there were discussions about Caroline possibly fighting back during the attack, as she had a black belt in kickboxing. This led to the unsettling idea that the intruders could have silenced her because she posed a threat. In the midst of this chaos, a significant development occurred. A Georgian national named Georgi Haradjisvili was arrested. His violent criminal history caught the attention of the police, and he bore a resemblance to the intruder sketch. Authorities were eager to see if he had any connection to the crime. The police interrogated Haradjisvili, but despite their efforts, he was eventually cleared of any involvement in Caroline's murder. As the investigation progressed, the pressure on law enforcement grew. The public was scared, and they wanted answers. The police faced mounting expectations to find the culprits. Yet, even as they pursued leads, something felt off. Details did not completely fit. And the more they pressed on the theory of intruders, the more it seemed like the pieces of the puzzle were not lining up. At this stage, it really seemed like the police were closing in on these so-called intruders, but something was not adding up. Babis's story, while initially convincing, began to show cracks as investigators looked deeper into the evidence. The absence of DNA or fingerprints, along with the absence of a typical robbery scene, left many questions unanswered. Reading through various reports and updates during this period, I could sense the frustration in the air. The community was on edge, anxiously awaiting news of the investigation. Everyone wanted to believe that the truth would come to light, but the reality was becoming more complicated by the day. As more time passed without answers, it became evident that the case was shifting. The idea of intruders began to waver, and the focus was starting to turn back toward Babis himself. The police had to take a closer look at his actions and the inconsistencies in his account. What had begun as a tragic murder case was transforming into a perplexing investigation filled with twists and turns. The early theories created a false sense of security. The idea that dangerous criminals were at large diverted attention from the possibility that the killer could be much closer to home. The investigation would soon take unexpected turns, leading to revelations that would shock the entire nation. The breakthrough. Babis becomes the suspect. A significant breakthrough in the case occurred when the police began to suspect Babis. Investigators started noticing inconsistencies in his timeline. Security footage from the neighborhood did not match his story. Even more alarming was the discovery of a missing memory card that could have held crucial evidence. This raised many questions. Why was the memory card missing, and what could it have shown? As detectives dug deeper, they analyzed Caroline's smartwatch data. This data provided critical information about the exact time of her death. Surprisingly, it did not align with Babis's account of events. Additionally, the fitness app linked to Babis's smartwatch showed activity during the time he claimed to be tied up, and painted a very different picture than the one he had shared with the police. With each piece of evidence, Babis's story began to unravel. There were several questionable details about how the intruders supposedly entered the home. The lack of fingerprints or DNA evidence made the story even harder to believe. If there were indeed intruders, where was the evidence they left behind? The inconsistencies pointed toward a staged home invasion, leading investigators to think Babis had orchestrated the entire scene to cover up his crime. The moment of confrontation came soon after Caroline's memorial service. Babis was discreetly taken into police custody, shocking everyone present. His facade of a grieving husband began to crack, revealing a different man entirely. In that moment, I could only imagine the emotions swirling around. There was confusion, anger, and sadness, all intermingled as the reality of the situation set in. I never expected what was about to unfold. I mean, who would? A man who had presented himself as the victim was now being treated as a suspect. The shocking twist left many people reeling. As more details emerged, it became clear that Babis's carefully crafted image was nothing but a cover for something far darker. With the police zeroing in on him, I could sense a change in the atmosphere surrounding the case. Friends and family who once sympathized with him were now left questioning everything. How could a person who seemed so devoted turn out to be capable of such horror? The idea that someone could fake their grief while hiding a terrible secret sent chills down my spine. As the investigation progressed, the narrative shifted dramatically. The police had transitioned from believing Babis was a victim to considering him the prime suspect. The evidence was becoming more compelling, and it was difficult to ignore the mounting signs of guilt. What had initially seemed like a tragic crime was evolving into a tale of deception and betrayal, and it felt like a nightmare that was only beginning to disclose. A chilling account of confession. After 8 long hours of intense interrogation, Babis finally confessed to the crime. His story took a dark turn as he claimed that the argument with Caroline began over their daughter. According to him, Caroline had threatened to leave with the child. This claim added a layer of complexity to the situation, but it did not excuse what he did next. Babis portrayed himself as the victim, saying that Caroline had become physically aggressive during their argument. He stated that he lost control and suffocated her. The chilling details he shared were horrifying. He confessed to strangling Caroline with a pillow, a method that spoke volumes about his intentions. After taking her life, he did not stop there. He also staged the entire robbery, going as far as killing their family dog to make the scene appear convincing. His plan involved tying himself up to create the impression of a victim in a home invasion. This act of betrayal against his family was nothing short of shocking. He had orchestrated a scene that would mislead everyone, from the police to the public, into thinking that intruders had brutally attacked his family. It was a cold and calculated attempt to escape justice, and it left me feeling sick to my stomach. During the confession, Babis made some remorseful statements saying, "I deserve to be punished." However, these words felt hollow in light of his actions. How could someone who claimed to love his wife take such a drastic step? The betrayal he displayed was incomprehensible. I could not believe it. How could someone do something like this, especially to the person they claimed to love? It was hard to grasp the reality of the situation. I felt a mix of disbelief and anger. Babis had turned a love story into a nightmare, and his confession was just the tip of the iceberg. It was a chilling reminder of how appearances can be deceiving. The man who once seemed like a devoted husband had become a murderer, and the pain he caused echoed through the lives of many. This was not just a crime. It was a tragedy that would haunt everyone involved. The trial and conviction. The legal aftermath of Babis's chilling confession was swift and severe. He faced multiple charges, including premeditated murder, lying to authorities, animal abuse, and obstructing justice. With the evidence stacked against him, the trial began in May 2022, drawing significant public attention. As the trial unfolded, Babis attempted to shift the blame onto Caroline, portraying her as the aggressor in their relationship. He wanted the court to see him as a man pushed to his limits. However, his defense fell flat. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Caroline's diary entries painted a different picture, showing her struggles and fears throughout their relationship. The smartwatch data also provided crucial information, revealing the timeline of events leading up to her death. It was clear that Babis was the one in control, not Caroline. About their observations of the couple's relationship, they painted a stark contrast to Babis's claims. Many described Caroline as kind and loving, while Babis was often seen as controlling and manipulative. The prosecution presented the case with clarity, making it evident that Babis had planned the crime and executed it with a cold heart. The moment the verdict was read was tense. Babis was found guilty on all charges. The courtroom was filled with emotions as the reality of the situation sank in. For many, it was a moment of justice, but there was also an underlying sadness. Caroline would never have the chance to tell her side of the story. Her life was cut short, and she would not get to escape the life that had become so painful for her. Hearing the verdict brought a sense of relief, but it also left a profound sadness. Caroline never had the opportunity to break free from the life she was trapped in. Her dreams, hopes, and desires were all taken away in an instant. This tragedy affected not only the family, but also the community that had come to know and care for her. It is heartbreaking to think about how a love story turned into a nightmare. Babis's actions robbed Caroline of her future and left a young child without a mother. As I reflect on the trial, it serves as a painful reminder of the dangers that can lurk behind closed doors. The truth may eventually come to light, but the scars left behind can last a lifetime. The impact on Caroline's family and society and the aftermath. The emotional toll on Caroline's family has been immense. Her parents, particularly her father, have shared their grief in public statements. They feel a profound sense of betrayal, not just by Babis, but by the circumstances that led to their daughter's death. They had trusted him and believed he loved her, only to discover that he had deceived everyone. This betrayal has left them shattered and searching for answers. Babis's initial public support of the police investigation is now seen as part of his web of deception. He presented himself as a grieving husband, while hiding the truth about what happened that night. This duality has made the pain for Caroline's family even more difficult to bear. They lost their daughter, and now face the challenge of reconciling the image of Bobby's they once had with the reality of who he truly is. The impact on society has been equally significant. The case shocked many, creating fear and uncertainty. People in Greece and beyond were captivated by the details of the crime. It became a media sensation, with news outlets covering every aspect of the investigation and trial. The intense coverage sparked discussions about domestic violence and the signs that can often go unnoticed. As the truth emerged, there was a sense of closure for some, but it came at a heavy price. Reflecting on the situation, it is heartbreaking to consider the people left behind, Caroline's family and her young daughter, who will grow up without her mother. The trust that was broken extends beyond individuals. It touched an entire community. This case shook not only Greece but also resonated with people around the world, reminding us of the importance of recognizing the signs of trouble in relationships. It serves as a painful lesson about the fragility of life and the darkness that can hide behind a smile. Lessons to learn and final thoughts. Babies and Agnostopoulos managed to fool everyone, from the police to the public and even the FBI. This case serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that come with hidden abuse. Many people only saw the smiling couple on social media, unaware of the turmoil that was happening behind closed doors. It is a wake-up call that teaches us to pay attention to the signs of emotional and physical abuse, even when they are not immediately visible. While this story has reached its conclusion, the impact will last forever. The tragedy of Caroline's life and death will continue to resonate, serving as a reminder of the importance of addressing domestic violence and emotional abuse. It is crucial for viewers to take these issues seriously, as they can happen to anyone. If you or someone you know is in a dangerous situation, please seek help. There are resources and organizations available to provide support and assistance. You do not have to face this alone. If you found this story compelling, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel. Stay informed about similar cases and learn more about the issues that matter. Blood stained the white wedding dress, the crowd frozen in horror as Amelia Harper lay motionless at the altar. Her husband, James, stood over her, knife still in hand, his vows of love twisted into an act of unimaginable violence. What was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives ended in murder, but the darkness behind this tragedy ran far deeper than anyone could have imagined. This is the true story of how one man's obsession and paranoia spiraled into a deadly nightmare. Amelia Harper's tragic death is more than just a wedding day horror. It's a tale of control, manipulation, and the darkest depths of human emotion. A wedding day turned into a nightmare. The day started out like any other wedding day, full of excitement and joy. Amelia Harper was dressed in a stunning white gown, surrounded by her closest friends and family. The venue was filled with flowers, soft music, and the chatter of guests eagerly awaiting the ceremony. It was supposed to be the perfect day, but what happened next is something no one could have ever predicted. As Amelia stood at the altar, ready to exchange vows with James, everything seemed normal. There was a brief pause, then a sudden horrifying movement. In the blink of an eye, James pulled out a knife and stabbed Amelia right in front of everyone. The crowd gasped in disbelief, unable to process what they were seeing. Blood stained her wedding dress as she collapsed, leaving guests frozen in shock. Some screamed, while others rushed to try and help her, but it was too late. Amelia was gone. Chaos erupted in the church as people scrambled to understand what had just happened. Guests were in tears, some trying to call for help while others stood in stunned silence. How could a man who was about to marry the love of his life take her life in such a cruel and violent way? James was immediately restrained, but the questions had already begun. Why had he done this? What could possibly drive someone to kill their bride in such a public and brutal manner? For the guests, this was supposed to be a celebration of love, but it turned into an unthinkable nightmare. From that moment, the investigation into James Harper's twisted mind began, and the horrifying truth started to come to light. Amelia and James, the perfect couple with dark secrets. When Amelia first met James, it seemed like a fairy tale beginning. They met at a mutual friend's party, and it did not take long for sparks to fly between them. Amelia's friends described her as bubbly, always full of life, and James appeared to be her perfect match. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely devoted to her. They quickly became inseparable, with James always by her side. Their relationship seemed ideal from the outside, a classic love story that was heading towards marriage. Amelia's family and friends were thrilled at first. James came across as polite, respectful, and deeply in love with her. Everyone thought she had found someone who truly cared for her, and her happiness was all they wanted. For a while, everything seemed perfect. People would comment on how lucky Amelia was to have found such a devoted partner. But slowly, things began to change, and not everyone could see it. As their relationship progressed, a different side of James started to emerge. What initially seemed like protective behavior turned into something much darker. James began to control who Amelia could see, what she could do, and even how she dressed. Subtle at first, his demands grew more intense as time went on. Her once vibrant social life started to shrink as James insisted that she spend more and more time with him, leaving little room for her friends and family. Amelia's friends started noticing the shift, but whenever they tried to bring it up, she would brush it off, insisting everything was fine. However, behind closed doors, things were far from okay. The tension between the couple grew, and Amelia's once bright spirit seemed to dim. Her friends later recalled how they had not seen much of her in the months leading up to the wedding, as if she had become more withdrawn and isolated. They could not shake the feeling that something was wrong, but by the time they realized how bad things had become, it was already too late. What started as a seemingly perfect relationship was slowly turning into a nightmare, as James's need for control overtook everything else. The signs were there, but no one fully understood the depth of the darkness that was building inside him. That darkness would eventually explode in the most tragic and violent way imaginable. Signs of danger. Amelia's silent fear. As the wedding day drew closer, the excitement that once filled Amelia's life was replaced by a growing sense of dread. Friends noticed her once joyful demeanor had shifted. There was something different about her, a kind of nervous energy that she struggled to hide. Her fear was not just about cold feet. It went much deeper than that. Those who were close to her would later recall how she seemed distant, as if she was carrying a heavy burden that no one could fully understand. Among the most haunting pieces of evidence that revealed her terror were the unsent letters found after her death. In these letters, Amelia poured out her heart, expressing her fear of what James had become. She wrote about how controlling he was and how she was scared of the man she was about to marry. Each letter revealed the tension and fear that had been building up inside her. But tragically, she never had the courage to send these letters, leaving them as silent witnesses to her growing anxiety. Amelia's fear was not entirely hidden. She had tried to reach out in small ways, hinting to friends that something was wrong. There were conversations where she would lightly joke about James being overprotective or too intense, but no one fully grasped the seriousness of what she was going through. Some friends offered their support, but Amelia's responses were always vague. It was as if she wanted to ask for help but could not bring herself to admit just how bad things had become. The fear of what might happen if she spoke out seemed to hold her back. One particularly chilling fact is that Amelia had scheduled an appointment with a lawyer just days before the wedding. It is believed that she was planning to explore her options for leaving James, possibly seeking legal advice on how to escape the marriage before it even began. Unfortunately, she never made it to that appointment. Whether she was too scared or something prevented her from going, we will never know. What we do know is that she was desperately seeking a way out, but time was running out faster than anyone realized. The signs were there, but they were missed or ignored by those around her. From her anxious behavior to the hints she dropped in conversations, Amelia was trying to signal that something was terribly wrong. However, her fear, James's manipulation, and the rushed approach to the wedding left little room for anyone to piece things together in time. This tragic oversight would soon lead to the darkest day in her life, a day that no one could have imagined: Jack McKenn's hunt for the truth. As news of the horrific murder spread, it was clear that the case would require an investigator with the right combination of experience and intuition. This is where Jack McKenn, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving complex cases, entered the scene. Known for his methodical approach and sharp instincts, McKenn had dealt with disturbing cases before, but even he could sense that this one was different from the very beginning. The brutality of Amelia's murder in such a public setting, combined with the eerily calm demeanor of her husband, James, suggested that there was more to this story than what met the eye. The investigation started with the basics, examining James's background, speaking to witnesses, and gathering evidence from the crime scene. Early on, McKenn noticed that something was off. James's friends and family painted a picture of a man who was once caring and gentle, but over time, something had shifted. There were mentions of a growing possessiveness, which only became worse as the wedding day approached. What really stood out to McKenn was how quickly James was willing to confess, yet his confessions were hollow, lacking any genuine emotion or regret. It was as if James believed he had done the right thing by killing Amelia. As the investigation deepened, McKenn brought in psychologist Alice Sanders to help understand James's mindset. Sanders had experience with disturbed individuals and was known for her ability to get into the minds of criminals. Together, they began to piece together a disturbing psychological profile of James. It became clear that he was not just a man who had snapped under pressure. He was someone who had spent years building a dangerous obsession with control and power. He saw Amelia as someone who needed to be controlled, and when he felt that control slipping away, he responded with unimaginable violence. During the interviews with Sanders, James's behavior became more troubling. In one-on-one sessions, he displayed a disturbing calmness. When placed under hypnotherapy, he revealed chilling details about his inner world. He spoke of his fantasies of controlling those around him and getting rid of anyone who challenged his authority. James did not seem like a man who was haunted by guilt. Instead, he spoke about his actions as if they were necessary steps to protect himself from betrayal. What James viewed as betrayal was not just limited to Amelia, though. He mentioned other women, hinting that Amelia's death might not have been his first act of violence. These sessions revealed a pattern of behavior that shocked both McKenn and Sanders. James's need for control had clearly been festering for years, but his ability to hide it from those closest to him was what made him even more dangerous. While Amelia's murder was the most public and brutal expression of his obsession, the investigation soon pointed to a much darker truth. There were likely other victims, unexplained disappearances, vague connections between James and missing women, and subtle clues in his conversations all hinted at the possibility that Amelia's murder was not an isolated event. McKenn's hunt for the truth took a sharp turn when he discovered the hidden basement in James's home. It was here that the investigation uncovered James's horrifying secret, a torture chamber that had been used for his sick rituals. This discovery tied together the chilling puzzle pieces, leading McKenn to the grim realization that James had been acting out his fantasies long before Amelia's murder. Each clue, from the bloodstains to the scratches on the walls, told a story of unspeakable torment that made it clear just how deep James's obsession with control truly went. The more McKenn dug into James's past, the more sinister the pattern became. James had not only murdered his bride in front of dozens of witnesses, but he had been hiding a trail of horrors that stretched far beyond Amelia's tragic death. Now it was up to McKenn and Sanders to bring these dark truths to light and ensure that James never had the chance to harm another soul again. A basement full of horrors. As Jack McKenn continued to dig deeper into James's life, something kept gnawing at him, the feeling that there was more to uncover. Despite having gathered strong evidence from the initial investigation, McKenn could not shake the sense that James's crimes went beyond Amelia's tragic murder. He decided to revisit James and Amelia's house, focusing on an area that had initially seemed insignificant, the basement. This decision would change the course of the investigation and reveal the true depth of James Harper's twisted mind. McKenn's gut feeling paid off. During the second search of the basement, he noticed something unusual, an area of the floor that seemed too clean, too neat, compared to the rest of the space. After carefully inspecting this spot, he found a hidden hatch that had been expertly concealed. When McKen and his team opened the hatch, it led them down a narrow, dark staircase into an even deeper part of the house, a place that no one had noticed before. What they uncovered was far more horrifying than anything they had anticipated. At the bottom of the stairs, McKen and his team found themselves in a small, damp room. The atmosphere was suffocating, and the walls were stained with dark spots that immediately raised suspicion. As they moved further into the room, it became clear that they had discovered a torture chamber. The air was thick with the stench of death, and the floor showed evidence of unimaginable violence. Blood stains were everywhere, and scratches on the walls revealed the desperate attempts of victims trying to escape. The most chilling discovery came in the form of several bundles covered in old, tattered rags. McKen knew that these bundles likely held the key to understanding just how deep James's crimes went, but nothing could prepare him for the horror inside. As they unwrapped the first bundle, they found the body of Emma Brockton, one of the women who had been reported missing. Her face was frozen in a look of terror, her hands tied tightly, as if she had been struggling in her final moments. The team's worst fears were confirmed when they opened the next bundle. Inside lay the remains of Linda Carter, another missing woman who had vanished without a trace months earlier. This discovery confirmed that James had not only killed Amelia, but had been responsible for the disappearance and murder of other women as well. These victims were not strangers, though. Both Emma and Linda had been friends of Amelia, which pointed to a more disturbing motive. It became clear that James's obsession with control had driven him to target the women he believed were trying to influence or take away his bride. In James's twisted mind, these women were threats to his relationship with Amelia, and in his quest for control, he brutally eliminated them. The room itself spoke volumes about the kind of psychological torture James had inflicted on his victims. The scratches on the walls and the bloodstains on the floor painted a grim picture of women who had been kept in this room for extended periods, enduring unimaginable suffering. Experts later determined that the victims had been tortured before their deaths, with knife wounds and rope marks on their bodies. James had not only taken their lives, he had done so in a way that allowed him to feel a sick sense of power and control over them. The connection between Amelia and these other women was undeniable, and it became clear that James had been acting out a long-held plan of revenge. These women, who were once Amelia's friends, had become targets simply because James believed they had influenced Amelia's desire to leave him. His hatred had grown so deep that he felt justified in torturing and murdering them, seeing it as a way to free himself from the people who threatened his control. In his mind, each of these women had played a role in driving Amelia away from him, and their deaths were his twisted form of justice. This discovery left McKen and his team reeling. The case had taken a darker turn than anyone could have predicted. What had started as a single, horrifying murder had revealed itself to be part of a much larger pattern of control, violence, and revenge. James Harper's sickening confession. As the investigation continued, Alice Sanders, the psychologist working with the police, began her hypnotherapy sessions with James Harper. These sessions were crucial in revealing the disturbing depths of his mind. From the very beginning, it was clear that James felt no remorse for his actions. His voice was cold and emotionless as he spoke, as if the lives he destroyed were insignificant. There was no hint of guilt. In one of the most chilling moments, James explained that his crimes were not random acts of violence, but, in his mind, a form of justice. He believed he was cleansing the world of people he saw as unworthy. He talked about Amelia and her friends as if they had wronged him in some way, and his murders were his way of restoring balance. His delusion was so strong that he seemed to believe he was right in what he did, as if it was some twisted form of justice. For Alice and Jack McKen, the lead investigator, these sessions were deeply unsettling. They had dealt with criminals before, but James's detachment from reality and his complete lack of empathy were unlike anything they had seen. He spoke of Amelia as if killing her was the only way to save her. In his mind, her attempts to assert her independence threatened his control, and he could not allow that. James's obsession with dominance drove him to murder, as he believed it was the only way to maintain his grip on her life. What made this even more terrifying was how calm and calculated James was in explaining his need for control. He described how Amelia's growing desire to distance herself from him was what triggered his actions. He could not bear the thought of losing her, and in his mind, eliminating her and anyone close to her was the only solution. James's need to dominate went beyond just his relationship with Amelia. He saw everyone who challenged him as a threat that needed to be removed. Each session with James peeled back more layers of his disturbing mindset. Alice and McKen began to understand that this was not just a man acting out of rage or jealousy. James was driven by a deep-seated desire for power, and he would stop at nothing to keep it. The revelations were horrifying, leaving no doubt that James was far more dangerous than anyone had realized. Hearing James speak so casually about his crimes was a chilling experience for both Alice and McKen. His lack of emotion, his delusional sense of justice, and his obsession with control made it clear that they were dealing with a truly disturbed individual, a man who saw murder as his way of restoring order to a world that he believed was slipping out of his grasp. The trial of a monster. When James Harper's trial began, it quickly became a media sensation. People were horrified by the details of the case, and the courtroom was filled with reporters, family members, and the public. Everyone was eager to see justice served for the brutal murders of Amelia and the other victims. From the start, the trial was emotionally charged, especially as the families of the victims took the stand to share their pain. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence against James. There were photographs of the torture chamber in the basement, DNA evidence tying him to the murders, and chilling recordings of his confession during hypnotherapy sessions. The court heard about the extent of James's control over Amelia, his obsession with power, and how he coldly eliminated anyone who challenged that control. As this evidence was laid out, the weight of what James had done became undeniable. Throughout the trial, James sat with the same emotionless expression he had shown during his interviews. He did not flinch or react to the testimonies of the families or the graphic descriptions of his crimes. His lawyer attempted to argue that James was mentally unstable and not responsible for his actions, trying to paint him as a victim of his own psychosis. However, the prosecution countered that James's actions were calculated and deliberate. His methodical planning and calm demeanor showed that he knew exactly what he was doing. One of the most heartbreaking moments of the trial came when Amelia's mother gave her emotional testimony. She described how Amelia had been full of life and love, only to have it all ripped away by the man who claimed to love her. Other family members of the victims echoed this, speaking of the unbearable loss and the scars left behind by James's actions. The jury did not take long to reach a verdict. James Harper was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. For the families of the victims, it was a small measure of justice, but the pain of losing their loved ones would never truly heal. James showed no emotion as the verdict was read, maintaining the same cold indifference he had displayed throughout the entire trial. Aftermath of the horror. After the trial, both Jack McKen and Alice Sanders were left grappling with the emotional weight of the case. For McKen, the investigation had been one of the darkest of his career. As he reflected on everything that had unfolded, he could not shake the thought that evil could hide so easily in someone like James, who seemed so ordinary on the surface. This realization left a lasting impact on him, serving as a grim reminder that even the people closest to us can conceal terrifying secrets. Alice, on the other hand, felt an immense responsibility after what she had exposed. She was determined to use her experience from this case to help others, especially in preventing future tragedies. The horrors she had witnessed through James's confessions fueled her commitment to educating people on recognizing signs of emotional manipulation and control in relationships. For her, this case underscored the importance of intervention before it was too late. In the end, this story became more than just a case file. It was a haunting reminder for everyone involved, and for us, the audience, that sometimes the signs of danger are there, but they are easy to miss. It is critical to be aware, to listen, and to act when something feels wrong. The horrifying reality of Amelia's death shows how dangerous it can be when love turns into possession. Can you imagine the terror she felt leading up to her final moments? Let's talk about it in the comments below. And if you're as captivated by this case as I am. One cold October night in Bengaluru, a routine family visit turned into a living nightmare when the police opened a refrigerator door in Mahalakshmi layout. Inside, they found something no one could have prepared for: the lifeless body of a woman chillingly preserved among household items. Today, I'm going to take you through the horrifying Mahalakshmi fridge case, a crime that shocked the entire city and left us all questioning how something this gruesome could happen in the first place. Background of the victim and accused. Varalakshmi, the victim in this heartbreaking case, was a 27-year-old woman with hopes and dreams like any of us. She worked as a home tutor, helping students in her neighborhood of Mahalakshmi Layout, Bengaluru. Her friends and family described her as kind-hearted and warm, someone who genuinely cared about the people around her. However, despite her efforts to maintain a happy and peaceful life, Varalakshmi was facing personal struggles behind the scenes, particularly in her relationship with Kumar. Kumar, the accused, was a man in his mid-30s, working as a cab driver to make ends meet. He came from a humble background and had been in Bengaluru for several years, trying to build a stable life. At first glance, Kumar seemed like an ordinary man, just trying to get by like many others in the city. However, his relationship with Varalakshmi painted a much darker picture as events unfolded. They had been in a live-in relationship for a while, which was fairly common in urban areas like Bengaluru. But behind closed doors, things were far from perfect. The two had met through mutual connections and quickly became close. Their relationship started on a positive note, as most do, and it did not take long for them to decide to move in together, but living together slowly exposed the cracks in their bond. Kumar's behavior became more controlling and aggressive over time. They had frequent arguments, and it became clear that their relationship was far from healthy. It seemed like a regular relationship at first, which is why the ending is even more disturbing. It is hard to understand how someone who once claimed to care for another person could commit such a brutal act. It is a reminder of how complicated and dangerous some relationships can turn out to be when emotional or psychological issues go unchecked. The day of the crime, October 6th, 2023, started like any other day for Varalakshmi and Kumar, but by the end of it, their lives would take a horrific turn. That morning, Kumar went about his routine, but something was brewing beneath the surface. Tensions had been escalating between the two over the past few weeks, with frequent arguments that often turned heated. On this particular day, their disagreement reached a boiling point. As the evening drew closer, the couple's argument intensified. Neighbors reported hearing loud shouting coming from their apartment, something that was sadly not unusual. But this time, the fight took a violent turn. Kumar, already frustrated and angry, lost control. In the heat of the moment, he brutally attacked Varalakshmi. The details of this part are both disturbing and heartbreaking. According to the police reports, Kumar strangled her in a fit of rage, an act that ended her life within minutes. It is hard to think about the kind of emotional state someone must be in to go from being in a relationship to committing such an act of violence. But what makes this even more chilling is what happened after. Instead of turning himself in or even reacting in panic, Kumar made a decision that still shocks many of us. He took Varalakshmi's lifeless body and stuffed it into their refrigerator. Yes, their household fridge, a place where we store food, became a hiding spot for her remains. He covered the body in plastic, hoping that this would somehow conceal the crime for at least a few days. This part is almost unimaginable. The thought that someone could not only kill, but then try to hide the evidence in such a manner. It was not just an attempt to cover up the murder. It was an act that required cold, calculated thinking, something that suggests Kumar was more than aware of what he had done. It is not like a sudden burst of emotion where one immediately regrets the action. This was a deliberate choice to hide the body, an effort to escape the consequences. Even after committing this unspeakable act, Kumar continued with his day as if nothing had happened. He left the apartment, going about his regular activities while Varalakshmi's body remained hidden in the fridge. That sense of normalcy in the face of such horror is what makes this case stand out. It was not just a crime of passion. It showed a complete lack of remorse. Kumar's decision to leave the body in such a manner not only delayed the discovery of the crime, but also created a horrifying scene when the authorities finally arrived. It was a gruesome situation, one that left both the police and neighbors in shock. Many people, even seasoned investigators, expressed how deeply disturbed they were by the method Kumar chose to conceal his crime. These details are difficult to digest, but they are necessary to understand the full extent of what happened that night. This case is a chilling reminder of how quickly things can escalate and how, in some situations, people cross lines that we would never have thought possible. Discovery of the crime. Days after the murder, Varalakshmi's family started to grow increasingly concerned. Varalakshmi was close to her family and would usually be in regular contact with them. When she stopped answering calls and messages, they immediately sensed that something was wrong. Initially, they might have thought it was a temporary issue. Perhaps she was busy or her phone was not working. But as the hours turned into days, their worry deepened. Her sudden silence was completely out of character, and the family knew they had to take action. When their repeated attempts to reach her were unsuccessful, Varalakshmi's family decided to visit her apartment. They had no idea what awaited them, but they knew something was seriously wrong. After trying to reach her by phone for several days, they went to her home on October 13th, 2023. However, even after arriving, there was no sign of her. The door remained locked, and Kumar was nowhere to be found either. That is when the family decided it was time to involve the authorities. The police were alerted to her disappearance soon after, and they took the case seriously, especially since the family had already expressed concerns about her safety due to recent tensions between Varalakshmi and Kumar. Officers arrived at the apartment, and after some time they were able to gain entry. What they found inside was beyond anything they could have anticipated. When the police opened the refrigerator, the truth was revealed in the most horrifying way. Varalakshmi's body, wrapped in plastic, had been stuffed inside. The shock that the officers and family members felt in that moment is hard to put into words. It was not just the fact that a body had been found, but the way it had been hidden in a place meant for everyday use, a refrigerator. The chilling contrast between such an ordinary object and the gruesome discovery is something that still haunts many who followed the case. This discovery must have been horrifying for everyone involved. I cannot even begin to imagine the shock and trauma felt by her family and the police officers who stumbled upon such a gruesome scene. Even as outsiders, just hearing about it is disturbing enough, but for those who were there, the emotional impact must have been overwhelming. The police immediately realized that Kumar, the man she had been living with, was their prime suspect, and a search for him began. The events following this shocking discovery would soon lead to Kumar's arrest, but the damage had already been done. The police investigation. When Varalakshmi's family reported her missing, the police did not waste any time. Given the details shared by her relatives about her strained relationship with Kumar, the police treated the case as urgent from the start. Initially, the family had hoped it would just be a case of miscommunication or a misunderstanding, but the situation quickly became far more serious after the horrifying discovery of her body in the refrigerator. This shocking find turned the case from a missing persons inquiry into a full-fledged murder investigation. Right from the beginning, Kumar became the main suspect. After the crime, he had attempted to go into hiding, doing whatever he could to evade detection. He had vanished from the apartment and cut off all communication with people who knew him, including his close circle of friends. It became clear that he was not just trying to distance himself from the scene, but was actively avoiding capture. It was reported that Kumar had even tried to create a fake alibi, telling some people he was out of town at the time of Varalakshmi's death. But the police knew better. They had too many reasons to suspect him. The investigation revealed several key pieces of evidence that would eventually lead to his capture. One of the most significant clues came from the CCTV footage near their apartment building. In these recordings, Kumar was seen entering and leaving the building at times that did not match his claims. The footage showed his movements during the days before and after the murder, and this completely dismantled his attempts at a false alibi. Kumar's phone records also provided crucial information. His call history and locations pointed directly to his involvement, showing that he was not far from the crime scene when Varalakshmi was killed. When investigators examined the crime scene, they were faced with more chilling details. The state of the apartment suggested that there had been a violent struggle. There were clear signs of a fight, with objects scattered around, giving the impression that things had escalated quickly between the couple. But perhaps the most unsettling part of the crime scene was, of course, the refrigerator. Kumar had tried to conceal the body in a desperate and bizarre attempt to cover up his crime. The refrigerator itself became a crucial piece of evidence, something no one could ever forget once it was found. The police worked methodically, following every lead they could. After gathering enough evidence and carefully analyzing Kumar's movements, they tracked him down. When they finally found him, there was no longer any way for him to escape the truth. The interrogation that followed was intense. At first, Kumar denied everything, continuing to act as though he had nothing to do with Varalakshmi's death. But the overwhelming evidence, combined with the pressure from the police, eventually broke him down. During questioning, Kumar eventually confessed to the crime. He admitted that things had spiraled out of control during their argument, leading him to commit the murder in a moment of rage. What is still deeply disturbing, though, is the way he tried to hide the body, as though that would somehow erase what he had done. His confession did not bring Varalakshmi back, but it did provide some answers to the police and her family, even though the sense of loss could never be undone. I have to say, the police worked quickly and effectively in this case. They gathered the right evidence, found the suspect, and secured his confession. But even with such efficient work, it is hard not to feel the weight of what was already lost. The tragedy had already unfolded before they could intervene. No matter how fast the investigation moved, it cannot change the fact that Varalakshmi's life was taken in such a cruel manner. Motive and psychology behind the crime. Understanding what could drive someone like Kumar to commit such a terrible act is difficult, but there are some clues that may shed light on his motive. It was clear from the beginning that the relationship between him and Varalakshmi had started to crumble in the months leading up to the murder. Financial problems were one of the major issues between the couple. Kumar had been struggling with money, and the pressure of these difficulties appeared to have had a significant impact on his mental state. Living together only seemed to increase the tension, as arguments about money became more frequent and intense. This financial strain was reportedly a huge source of frustration for Kumar. In addition to their financial troubles, it seemed that Kumar's possessiveness and control over Varalakshmi had also escalated over time. Friends and family mentioned that the relationship had become toxic, with Kumar becoming more volatile. While these kinds of power dynamics in relationships are sadly common, they are often a warning sign of emotional and psychological instability. When people feel like they are losing control over their life or their partner, it can sometimes lead to extreme and violent reactions. In Kumar's case, this may have been one of the factors that pushed him to commit the murder during their heated argument. Experts who have looked at similar cases suggest that a combination of emotional instability, anger, and desperation often leads to such tragedies. Psychologists might describe Kumar's behavior as stemming from deep-rooted frustrations that were building up over time. His inability to manage stress, particularly in the face of financial and relationship problems, likely created an explosive situation. When someone like Kumar feels cornered, whether by life circumstances or personal conflicts, they can become irrational, lashing out in ways that would normally be unimaginable. Some professionals in the field of forensic psychology argue that Kumar's actions suggest not only a loss of emotional control, but also a complete disregard for the consequences of his violence. In cases like these, the individual might enter a state of rage where they act without thinking, completely blinded by their emotions in the heat of the moment. After the murder, Kumar's bizarre decision to hide the body in a refrigerator speaks to a disturbed mind. The act of storing the body in such a cold, calculated way, almost as if it were an object to be hidden, adds another layer of horror to this case. It shows not just a desire to avoid responsibility, but also a chilling level of detachment. While it is tempting to try and understand why someone would commit such a heinous crime, it is still horrifying to think about what must have been going through his head during those moments. It is important to acknowledge that no matter what the pressures were, nothing can ever justify such violence. Kumar may have been overwhelmed by his circumstances, but that does not change the fact that he took a life in a brutal, unforgivable way. What makes it even harder to grasp is how he could go from arguing with Varalakshmi to killing her, and then coldly attempting to hide her body. Legal developments and current status. After the gruesome discovery of Varalakshmi's body in the refrigerator, the police wasted no time in arresting Kumar. He was taken into custody just days after the crime, charged with murder under Section 302 of the Indian Penal Code. Since the crime took place in early October 2023, the legal process has been steadily moving forward, but as is often the case in the Indian judicial system, there can be delays and challenges that slow down justice. Following Kumar's arrest, the police presented their findings, including the evidence they had gathered, CCTV footage, phone records, and his confession. As of now, the case is still in the pretrial phase, with preliminary court hearings already underway. The prosecution is working on building a strong case against him, while Kumar remains in judicial custody, awaiting the official start of his trial. His defense has not provided much information, but it is expected that they will likely focus on mental health or financial strain as part of their strategy. In terms of the potential punishment, if found guilty, Kumar could face life imprisonment or even the death penalty, depending on how the court views the nature of his crime. The cold and calculated manner in which he tried to hide the body might be considered an aggravating factor, which could lead to harsher sentencing. However, like with many high-profile cases, there could be delays due to legal complexities, appeals, or procedural roadblocks. At this stage, justice is still pending for Varalakshmi and her family. Personally, I hope the legal process moves swiftly and without unnecessary hurdles, so her loved ones can finally find some peace. The waiting period for justice can feel unbearable, especially after such a traumatic event. It is hard to even think about what her family must be going through right now. Public reactions and media coverage. The Mahalakshmi fridge murder case quickly caught the attention of both the media and the public. From the first reports of Varalakshmi's shocking death, local and national news outlets covered the story extensively. Headlines were filled with horrifying details: how her body had been discovered in a fridge, Kumar's arrest, and his attempts to cover up the crime. Each new development brought more focus to the case, with reporters following every move of the police and the legal proceedings. It became the talk of the town, sparking conversations not just in Bengaluru, but across India. Public reactions to this case were intense and emotional. Online, people expressed their shock, grief, and anger. Social media platforms were flooded with posts condemning the brutality of the crime. Many questioned how something so horrific could happen within a household. In Mahalakshmi layout, the community where Varalakshmi lived, there was an overwhelming sense of disbelief. Neighbors who knew her and Kumar were stunned, unable to reconcile the friendly face they saw every day with the gruesome crime he committed behind closed doors. This case also reignited debates about safety and domestic violence in Bengaluru. Many wondered whether warning signs had been missed. Could this tragedy have been prevented if more attention was paid to domestic conflicts? Bengaluru has seen a rise in violent crime, and this incident added to the ongoing concern about the safety of women in the city. Organizations advocating for women's rights and domestic violence prevention voiced their outrage, calling for stronger measures to protect individuals in vulnerable situations. For me, seeing how the public reacted shows just how disturbing this case really is. People are not just asking who committed the crime, but why it was allowed to happen in the first place. Many are left wondering how someone could reach such a dark place, and it has left the community grappling with a deep sense of unease. This tragedy has left a mark on everyone following it, and it is clear that Varalakshmi's story will not be forgotten anytime soon. Broader implications and reflections. The Mahalakshmi fridge case extends beyond the horror of a single crime. It highlights serious issues within society. Domestic violence is a significant problem, often hidden behind closed doors. Many people suffer in silence, fearing they will not be believed, or that seeking help will only make their situation worse. This case has drawn attention to the urgent need for awareness about domestic abuse. It shows that many individuals might feel trapped in dangerous situations, which can lead to devastating outcomes. In addition to awareness, there is a pressing need for support systems that can help victims of domestic violence. Safe shelters, counseling services, and hotlines can make a crucial difference. When individuals feel they have a safe space to turn to, they may find the courage to escape unhealthy relationships. Furthermore, legal protections for victims must be strengthened. Laws should not only punish perpetrators, but also protect those who are in harm's way. The issues surrounding this case also point to the importance of mental health in relationships. Sometimes, underlying psychological problems can escalate conflicts and lead to violence. Kumar's actions suggest that he may have struggled with significant mental health challenges. Society often overlooks mental health until it manifests in dangerous ways. Addressing mental health issues before they lead to violence is crucial. Encouraging open conversations about feelings and frustrations can help partners communicate better, potentially preventing tragic outcomes. It is essential to consider societal pressures that may contribute to these situations. Cultural expectations can place a heavy burden on individuals in relationships. There may be a stigma attached to seeking help, especially for men, who might feel that they must handle everything on their own. Recognizing these pressures can help society create more supportive environments for everyone, encouraging individuals to seek help when needed. Reflecting on this case, I cannot help but think about the warning signs we might overlook. This situation reminds us to pay closer attention to those around us. A sudden change in behavior, isolation from friends and family, or unexplained injuries can be red flags. Awareness can be a powerful tool in preventing tragedies like this one. Every time a case like this makes the news, it becomes an opportunity for society to learn and grow. We must ask ourselves what steps we can take to create a safer environment for everyone. Raising awareness, fostering open conversations, and providing better support systems can lead to positive changes. It is essential to work towards a future where no one feels trapped and where love and respect thrive in relationships. As the legal system slowly processes Kumar's case, the weight of this tragedy is still felt by Varalakshmi's loved ones and the entire Bengaluru community. What kind of justice do you think is appropriate in such a heartbreaking situation? Manhunt for Adam the Killer on the Run. The discovery of Nadia El Dip's body sent shockwaves through the community and the nation. In the aftermath, the police quickly identified Adam Bahar as the prime suspect in her brutal murder. He was not just a person of interest. He was the main focus of a widespread investigation. Nadia's family and friends were left heartbroken, grappling with the loss of a young woman full of dreams and aspirations. The search for justice became a desperate manhunt for the man who took her life. The police launched a nationwide manhunt, calling for the public's help in locating Adam. Flyers with his picture were distributed, and news outlets broadcasted details about the case. Despite the massive effort to find him, Adam seemed to be one step ahead of the authorities. He demonstrated a chilling ability to evade capture, as if he had a plan all along. In an attempt to cover his tracks, Adam abandoned his cell phone. This was a calculated move, as the phone would have revealed his location and communications. Instead, he began using payphones to reach out to people, making it much harder for law enforcement to trace him. This tactic reflected his awareness of how to avoid detection, making his actions seem all the more premeditated. Throughout the manhunt, Adam made several cash withdrawals from ATMs. This decision ensured he did not leave a digital trail, which would have made it easier for the police to track him down. He constantly switched locations, moving from one place to another, further complicating the search. He appeared to anticipate the police's strategies, staying alert to any attempts to apprehend him. As the days passed, it became increasingly clear that Adam's actions were not just impulsive reactions to the situation. Instead, they suggested a disturbing level of planning and forethought. It is frightening to consider how someone could think through their actions so carefully, especially after committing such a violent crime. His efforts to evade capture painted a picture of someone who believed he could escape the consequences of his actions. This whole scenario raises questions about the nature of his mindset. How could he feel justified in doing something so horrific, yet still have the presence of mind to plan his escape? For Nadia's loved ones, these questions only added to the pain of her loss. Every day that passed without finding Adam was another day filled with uncertainty and fear. The manhunt became not just a search for a killer, but also a search for closure in a case that shook everyone to their core. Showdown with the police. A deadly standoff. Just 4 days after the tragic murder of Nadia El Dip, Adam Bahar was spotted driving a stolen vehicle. This sighting was crucial, as it finally gave law enforcement a lead in their manhunt. The stolen car marked a significant turn in the investigation. Police quickly recognized the vehicle and set out to apprehend him. The tension in the air was palpable as officers initiated a high-speed chase, launching into an intense pursuit that would cover over 87 miles. The chase was nothing short of chaotic. Adam drove recklessly, weaving in and out of traffic while trying to evade capture. The police were determined to stop him, using various tactics to bring the chase to an end. They deployed spike belts along the road, a strategic move designed to puncture his tires and halt his escape. Each second felt like an eternity, as officers worried about the safety of others on the road while also trying to catch a dangerous fugitive. Despite the dangers, Adam managed to evade the spike belts and continued driving at high speeds. However, the police were relentless. They used their training and experience to stay close behind him, working together to coordinate their efforts. As the chase progressed, it became clear that the situation was escalating. Adam's desperation was evident, and everyone could feel that a confrontation was imminent. Eventually, Adam made the decision to stop the car. He parked on the side of the road and assumed a tactical position. Armed with a rifle, he appeared ready for a confrontation. The police quickly surrounded the area, recognizing the threat he posed. The standoff that followed was intense and frightening, with both sides aware that violence could erupt at any moment. The shootout began with Adam firing at the police, who quickly returned fire. Over 200 rounds were exchanged in a matter of moments. The noise of gunfire echoed through the area, and the chaos unfolded in front of both law enforcement and onlookers. One police officer was hit during the exchange, but fortunately, he survived the ordeal. The entire scene was a tragic reminder of how quickly situations can escalate, turning a routine apprehension into a life-threatening standoff. As the standoff continued, it became clear that Adam was not going to surrender. He was trapped, and with no way out, his aggression only intensified. The police were under extreme pressure to resolve the situation without further harm. Negotiators attempted to communicate with Adam, but he refused to engage in any dialogue. In a shocking turn of events, police eventually made the decision to end the standoff. In response to the ongoing threat he posed, they acted decisively. The situation reached its climax as officers used lethal force against Adam. He was killed during the confrontation, bringing an end to a tense and violent episode that began with the brutal murder of a young woman. The outcome left many people reflecting on the events that had unfolded. For Nadia's family and friends, the news was bittersweet. While they felt relief that Adam could no longer harm anyone else, they also faced the reality that Nadia's life had been taken in such a horrific manner. The deadly standoff served as a stark reminder of the tragic consequences of obsession and violence, leaving a lasting impact on everyone involved. Shattered lives and questions that will never be answered. The aftermath of Nadia El-Dip's murder left her family shattered, especially her sister Rasha. The pain and heartbreak Rasha experienced are impossible to measure. Losing a sister is one of the most profound losses a person can endure. Rasha often shared how Nadia was not just her sister, but also her confidant and friend. The grief felt by her family is a reminder of the lasting impact that such a tragedy can have on loved ones. They are left with a void that can never be filled and memories that are now bittersweet. The community felt the loss deeply as well. Nadia was a vibrant young woman with dreams and aspirations, and her murder sent shockwaves through the local area. Young women in particular were affected. Many of them began to question their own safety and the relationships they were in. The fear of violence is a chilling reality that many women face, and this tragedy only heightened those concerns. Nadia's death highlighted the urgent need for awareness and support around issues of domestic violence and obsession. There are unanswerable questions that linger in the minds of many. What caused Adam Bahar to snap so violently? This question haunts those who knew Nadia, and even those who did not. It is hard to comprehend how someone could turn to such extreme violence. Adam had no criminal history, and there were no clear signs of previous violent behavior. This fact makes the case even more unsettling. Many wonder how someone who seemed normal could commit such an unimaginable act. It is natural to wonder if anything could have been done differently to prevent it. Were there signs of obsession that were overlooked? Were there moments when Nadia or her friends could have recognized the danger she was in? It is important to discuss these points because they might help others in similar situations. Conversations about healthy relationships and recognizing toxic behavior are essential. While it is impossible to change the past, understanding these dynamics can help prevent future tragedies. The loss of Nadia reminds us of the importance of vigilance, compassion, and support in our communities. Understanding the dark side of obsession and control. Obsession in relationships can escalate frighteningly fast. What starts as affection can spiral into possessiveness, and often people do not realize the danger until it is too late. Stories like Nadia's remind us how critical it is to recognize the signs early. Controlling behavior is often disguised as care or concern. When someone begins to demand constant communication or expresses jealousy over time spent with friends, it can feel flat. unflattering. At first, these actions might seem like a sign of love. However, they are usually red flags that should not be ignored. Such behaviors can create a toxic dynamic where one partner feels trapped. I often wonder how many people, just like Nadia, were caught in this cycle, mistaking control for love. Experts say people who react violently to rejection often have deep-seated fears of abandonment. It is heartbreaking to see love turn into rage and violence when control is threatened. But no matter the reason, there is never an excuse for violence in a relationship. I feel frustrated that these red flags are sometimes brushed off. Why do some individuals ignore the warning signs? The earlier indicators of obsession, like excessive questioning about whereabouts or isolating a partner from friends and family, are often brushed off. I think many people do not realize that these patterns can lead to severe consequences. If something feels off in a relationship, it is important to trust that instinct. Recognizing these signs could make all the difference in someone's life. For anyone feeling unsafe or controlled in their relationship, there are resources and organizations that offer help. It is reassuring to know there is support out there, even when it feels hard to ask for it. By recognizing and addressing the signs of unhealthy relationships, we can prevent more tragedies like Nadia's from happening again. Love should never come with fear. Obsession turned deadly, and Nadia's life was taken far too soon. What makes this tragedy even more devastating is the question, could anything have been done to prevent this? Were the warning signs missed? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future true crime stories like this one. 40 times. 40 savage strikes. Each one more brutal than the last. As Nadia El Dip's blood spilled on the ground, her cries for help were silenced by the overwhelming force of Adam Bahar's rage. What started as an obsessive relationship ended in a night of unimaginable horror, with Nadia stabbed again and again by the man who claimed to love her. This is the chilling story of a 22-year-old university student whose life was brutally taken by her obsessive ex-boyfriend, a man who then turned his violence toward the police. The pain Nadia endured that night is haunting, and today we're going to walk through the series of events that led to this heartbreaking crime. Who Nadia El Dip was before the nightmare began. Before her life was cruelly taken away, Nadia El Dip was much more than just another university student. She was a vibrant, intelligent young woman who had so much ahead of her. At only 22, she was pursuing a degree with the dream of becoming a legal assistant, and her ambitions did not stop there. She hoped to go further, to become a lawyer one day. Nadia cared deeply about making a difference in the world, especially when it came to women's rights and supporting LGBTQ+ issues. She was passionate about helping others and fighting for equality, something that stood out to those who knew her best. Nadia's family had moved to Canada from Lebanon in search of a better life, bringing with them a rich cultural heritage. Like so many immigrant families, they faced challenges, but they also thrived, building a new home and community in Canada. Nadia was proud of her Lebanese roots and carried her family's values of hard work, love, and respect with her. Her family described her as loving and kind, someone who was always smiling and who wanted nothing but peace and happiness for those around her. She was not just focused on her studies. Nadia was social and outgoing, the type of person who always made time for her friends. Those close to her remember her as loyal, someone who could be trusted with anything. She had a bright future, filled with potential, and was determined to make her mark on the world. But all of that was tragically cut short in a way no one could have ever predicted. It is heartbreaking to think that someone so full of life and promise could become the victim of such a brutal and senseless crime. Toxic love red flags that went unnoticed. Nadia El Dip crossed paths with Adam Bahar in what seemed like an ordinary way. They met through mutual connections, and for a brief period, Nadia allowed him into her life. However, what started as a seemingly innocent relationship quickly turned toxic. Their relationship was short, lasting only a few months. But in that time, Adam's behavior began to reveal troubling signs. He became possessive and controlling, traits that often go unnoticed in the early stages of relationships, but, looking back, stand out as clear red flags. One of the early indicators was Adam's attempts to control Nadia's choices. He would try to dictate how she dressed and who she spent her time with, constantly inserting himself into her personal decisions. Nadia, a strong and independent young woman, resisted these efforts, But Adam's actions were already a sign that his love was not healthy. Friends noticed changes in Nadia, how she began to feel more tense and withdrawn, though she never openly spoke about what was happening. Unfortunately, many of these warning signs went unnoticed, or perhaps they were brushed aside because it is so easy to dismiss controlling behavior as jealousy or protectiveness. The relationship came to an end when Nadia decided to break up with Adam. She wanted to focus on her future, her studies, and her goals. She had dreams of building a meaningful career and knew that Adam's behavior was becoming a distraction and a source of stress. Breaking up with him was her way of reclaiming control over her life and steering her path back toward her ambitions. But Adam did not take it well. In fact, he became fixated on her, his behavior crossing the line from being upset to becoming dangerously obsessed. Looking back, the red flags were there: Adam's need to control Nadia, his increasing possessiveness, and his inability to accept the breakup. At the time, however, it was easy for Nadia and those around her to see these behaviors as just the pain of a relationship ending. No one could have imagined the depth of Adam's obsession, or that it would lead to such a horrific outcome. In many cases like this, toxic love can be hard to recognize until it is too late, leaving victims like Nadia vulnerable to escalating violence. Not the night of terror. Nadia disappeared. March 24th, 2018, started as a regular Saturday night for 22-year-old Nadia El Dip. She had plans to spend the evening out with her friends at a shisha bar in Montreal. It was a place she frequented, where she could relax, laugh, and enjoy herself after a long week. But that night, something unexpected happened. She ran into Adam Bahar. Despite their brief and tumultuous relationship, which had ended months earlier, Adam was there, and their paths crossed once again. At first, it seemed like a simple conversation between two people who had once been close. Nadia, ever polite and level-headed, engaged in the conversation without showing signs of distress to her friends. However, what her friends and those around her did not know was how manipulative Adam had become. Over the course of their brief interaction, Adam somehow convinced Nadia to leave the bar with him. Perhaps he promised her something, or maybe she thought it was easier to diffuse the situation by going with him temporarily. Whatever his words were, they convinced Nadia to step away from her friends, and that was the last time they would see her alive. At around 11 p.m., as she left with Adam, Nadia sent a chilling message to one of her friends. The text expressed concern. It hinted at trouble. Nadia wrote that Adam was refusing to take her back to her car. She was in a state of unease, but was not yet panicked. Her instincts were telling her something was not right, and though she tried to handle it on her own, it was clear that Adam was not letting her leave. After sending that text, Nadia fell silent. As the hours passed, Nadia's family began to worry. It was not like her to disappear without letting anyone know where she was. By the early morning hours of March 25th, her family's anxiety had turned into outright fear. Her sister, Rasha, knew something was terribly wrong. Nadia had not returned home, and there had been no word from her since the ominous message to her friend the previous night. Rasha decided to retrace Nadia's steps. She drove to the shisha bar where Nadia had been earlier, hoping for some kind of clue. It was there, in the parking lot, that Rasha's worst fears started to come true. She found Nadia's car, parked and untouched. Her heart sank when she noticed that Nadia's personal belongings were still inside, including her phone and purse. The fact that Nadia had left without her things was a sign that something had gone terribly wrong. As Rasha stood there, staring at her sister's abandoned car, the pieces began to fall into place. Nadia's sudden silence, the disturbing text, and now this. Everything pointed to the grim reality that Nadia was in danger, and time was running out. The brutal discovery: Nadia found, stabbed 40 times. 5 days after Nadia El Dip disappeared, the truth behind her fate came to light in the most horrifying way possible. On March 29, 2018, the police discovered her lifeless body in the backyard of a home in Montreal's Lachine borough. The house belonged to Adam Bahar's family, and it was there, on that cold, unforgiving ground, that Nadia's life had been violently stolen from her. The discovery was a nightmare that no family should ever have to experience. When the police arrived, they were met with a chilling scene. Nadia's body had been hidden, but the sheer brutality of what had been done to her could not be covered up. Investigators confirmed her identity through forensic evidence and began piecing together what had led to such a gruesome outcome. It was not just the fact that she had been murdered, it was the savagery of the attack that shocked everyone. The autopsy report revealed the full extent of the violence. Nadia had been stabbed 40 times. Each stab wound represented Adam's growing rage, his desperate need for control, and his twisted obsession. She had also been shot twice. The combination of these injuries made it clear that Nadia had fought for her life in those final moments. She had tried to escape, but Adam's determination to harm her was relentless. The attack took place after Adam lured Nadia back to his family's house, a place she had likely visited before during their brief relationship. As the night wore on, Adam's attempts to win Nadia back turned dark. When Nadia refused his advances and made it clear that she wanted nothing to do with him, something snapped inside him. It was in that moment, in the house that should have been a safe space, that Adam's obsession boiled over into pure violence. At some point, Nadia managed to break free from Adam's grip. Desperate to get away, she made a run for her life, trying to escape the car they had been sitting in. But Adam was not far behind. He chased her down like a predator hunting prey, refusing to let her go. He caught up to her in the backyard, where the final brutal attack took place. It was there, out in the open, that he unleashed his fury, stabbing her repeatedly as she fought for her life. What is especially horrifying is that Nadia was not just attacked once. After stabbing her, Adam then shot her twice, as though the brutal stabbing was not enough to satisfy his need for control. It was a cold and calculated end to a young woman's life, one that left an indelible mark on everyone who heard the story. Reflecting on the violence Nadia endured is difficult. The sheer brutality of it all is something that feels almost incomprehensible. It is hard to imagine someone inflicting such pain on another human being, especially someone they once claimed to care about. Nadia's only crime was rejecting Adam and wanting to move on with her life. For that, she paid the ultimate price. This kind of violence is not just an act of rage, it is the culmination of Adam's obsessive need to control Nadia. It speaks to a much larger issue of domestic violence, where many women, just like Nadia, become victims of people they thought they knew. As we hear about her last moments, it is impossible not to feel the overwhelming tragedy of her story. A life filled with promise, taken so cruelly by the very person who claimed to love her. Abdullah told Laiba that morning, "Even if you are dying, you must go down those stairs and wash the dishes." These were Abdullah's demands, even as his young wife Laiba was carrying his child and enduring immense pain. Her family never imagined that only hours later, they would find Laiba's life brutally ended, her body bearing signs of unimaginable violence. When her family arrived at the hospital, they saw what they never expected. Laiba, barely recognizable, with her throat slashed and her body bruised. She had been married for only a few months, but that short time had been filled with pain, control, and violence. This is Laiba's story, a young woman who was only 19 years old, trying to survive in a marriage that would ultimately become a nightmare. Today, I am sharing her family's words, the heartbreaking details of what happened behind closed doors, and the tragic outcome that they never thought possible. Who was Laiba? Laiba was just 19 years old, stepping into a new chapter of life with hopes and dreams for her future. As the youngest in her family, she was not only cherished, but deeply protected by her siblings. Losing her mother 3 years earlier had created a bond between Laiba and her sisters that went beyond typical sibling relationships. Her sisters became her closest confidants, sharing in her joys and sorrows, and offering guidance as she transitioned from childhood to adulthood. When Laiba married Abdullah, her family hoped this new chapter would bring happiness and stability. They saw her as someone who deserved a life filled with kindness and respect, and they trusted Abdullah to provide that. Laiba herself looked forward to her future, thinking she would have a loving partner to support her. However, things did not go as planned, and the story that unfolded was not the one she or her family had ever imagined. The marriage and early signs of trouble. Laiba entered her marriage with a sense of hope, trusting that Abdullah genuinely loved her and that this new life would bring her happiness. Like many young brides, she had dreams of a caring husband and a peaceful home. Her sisters remember how Abdullah seemed attentive before the wedding, portraying himself as someone who would look after Laiba with kindness and respect. However, those early promises began to unravel soon after the wedding. Not long into their marriage, Abdullah's personality began to change. The affection he had once shown faded, replaced by moods that Laiba's sisters described as harsh and cold. Her sisters saw how Laiba struggled, noticing bruises and marks on her that hinted at physical abuse. The emotional strain was clear too. Laiba's voice on the phone with her sisters grew quieter, and her usual lightheartedness was missing. What was supposed to be a safe, loving marriage quickly turned into a painful experience, filled with fear and isolation. Adding to the complexity, Laiba learned she was pregnant only 3 months into the marriage. Her pregnancy, which might have been a source of joy, instead heightened her feelings of entrapment. She now felt she had to think not only of her own safety, but also of her unborn child's future. Laiba's struggles within the household. Once Laiba moved into Abdullah's family home, the reality of her life there turned dark and exhausting. Despite her pregnancy and the fatigue that came with it, she was expected to shoulder all the household chores without any rest or understanding. Her sisters remember her mentioning how she would feel dizzy and weak, yet Abdullah showed little care for her condition. Instead of being concerned, he would expect her to continue cooking, cleaning, and fulfilling every demand of the household. There was no empathy, no concern for her well-being, only relentless pressure to do more. It was not just the physical strain. Laiba's mental health began to suffer severely as well. Abdullah's indifference grew into outright emotional manipulation. He used threats of divorce to keep her under control, warning her that he would leave her if she did not fulfill his expectations or dared to voice her discomfort. Laiba's access to others was also limited. Abdullah often isolated her from her family, even going so far as to put a lock on her phone, restricting her ability to reach out for help or comfort. Laiba's sisters could see the toll this was taking on her, both physically and emotionally. They described her as a shadow of her former self, worn down from the constant mistreatment and isolation. She was trapped in an environment where cruelty seemed to come daily, leaving her feeling entirely alone. Her sisters' concern grew, realizing that the Laiba they once knew was slipping away, replaced by someone weighed down by fear and exhaustion. The investigation and family's plea for justice. In the aftermath of Laiba's death, her family, especially her sisters, has tirelessly demanded a thorough investigation. They believe the details of her case are far too suspicious to ignore and have been vocal about their suspicions that Laiba's death was no accident, nor was it a choice she made herself. Yet, despite the evident signs of abuse and manipulation, authorities initially considered the possibility of suicide, which left Laiba's family feeling frustrated and unheard. For Laiba's loved ones, this was not just an oversight by the authorities. It was a painful denial of Laiba's reality. Her family, who knew firsthand about the hardships she endured, is convinced that years of mistreatment at Abdullah's hands are what led to her tragic end. They see this case as a reflection of an ongoing issue where women facing abuse often go unheard, even when the signs are clear. To them, this is not only about getting justice for Laiba, but also about setting a precedent that abuse and cruelty cannot be dismissed. The family's demands are specific and firm. They are calling for Abdullah to be held accountable, as well as his mother, who has been absconding since the incident. Laiba's sisters have gone as far as to plead with higher authorities to step in and ensure that justice is served. They are determined to keep pushing, hoping that no one else will have to endure what Laiba did, and that her story will not be brushed aside, but treated with the seriousness it deserves. Reflections on Laiba's tragic death. Laiba's death has left her family shattered, especially her sisters, who are haunted by feelings of regret and helplessness. They have spoken about the constant pain they feel, wishing they had done more to protect her. They cannot shake the thought that, maybe, if they had intervened sooner or urged her to leave Abdullah's household, her life could have been saved. It is a sorrow that weighs heavily on them, intensified by the belief that Laiba suffered in silence, believing there was no way out. This tragedy reflects a sad truth that many women and families experience in societies where discussing abuse can bring shame or, worse, escalate the violence. Fear of judgment or retaliation often keeps women from speaking up, and this silence enables abusers to continue. Laiba's sisters want people to understand that abuse should never be accepted or ignored, regardless of the pressures or fears involved. They hope Laiba's story serves as a wake-up call, a reminder for families and communities to recognize the warning signs, offer support, and act before it is too late. This call for change, fueled by Laiba's story, carries a plea that no other woman endures what she did, and that intervention comes before the pain becomes irreversible. Laiba's life was full of dreams that never had a chance to come true. Her family is left with questions that may never be answered. What do you think about her tragic story? Share your thoughts. Like the video if it resonated, and subscribe for more powerful stories. The disturbing night of Laiba's death. The night Laiba lost her life was haunting and chaotic, a memory her family will never forget. Around 2:30 late night, Laiba's family was jolted awake by a phone call from Abdullah's father. His words were cold and alarming. He told them that an argument had broken out and they needed to come take Laiba home. It was an unusual hour for a call like this, and the distress in his voice hinted that something was terribly wrong. Only a few minutes later, before they could even make sense of what was happening, a second call came through. This time, from Abdullah himself. His tone was frantic, as he told them not to come to the house after all, but to go directly to the hospital. The shift in his instructions was confusing, but the urgency in his voice made Laiba's family fear the worst. They rushed to the hospital with a sense of dread filling every moment of that ride. When Laiba's family arrived at the hospital, their worst fears were confirmed. There, they found Laiba lying motionless, her body covered in brutal marks. She was gone. Her throat had been slashed, and bruises marked her skin, a silent testament to the violence she had suffered. The horrifying sight left her family in shock, their minds unable to grasp the cruelty she had endured in her final hours. In their grief, Laiba's sisters examined her body closely, looking for answers. One detail that stood out to them was the absence of defensive wounds on her hands. There were no signs that she had fought back, which left her family deeply unsettled. Abdullah had initially claimed that she had attacked him first, yet there was no evidence on her body to support this. Instead, the injuries suggested that she had been completely defenseless, caught off guard, and subjected to unimaginable brutality. For Laiba's family, this night marked the end of a battle she had fought silently and alone. The horrific details of her last moments became an unbearable burden for them, raising questions that would haunt them long after she was gone. Abdullah's conflicting stories and suspicions of murder. The days following Laiba's death brought a wave of confusion, as Abdullah's explanations shifted and seemed increasingly contradictory. At first, he claimed that he had accidentally stabbed Laiba. The word accidentally seemed hollow, given the state of her body and the brutal wounds she had suffered. When questioned further, his story changed, and he alleged that Laiba had attacked him in a sudden fit of rage, forcing him to retaliate. In his attempt to justify what happened, Abdullah tried to paint Laiba as the aggressor. He went as far as accusing her of infidelity, suggesting that she had somehow provoked him that night. Yet, there was no evidence to support any of his accusations. To Laiba's family, these claims were both painful and absurd. They knew the kind of person Laiba was, someone who deeply valued her family and was excited to become a mother. Her sisters, especially, found Abdullah's accusations outrageous. They believed that Laiba was focused on building a future for her unborn child and would never have risked her life or her babies over an argument. For Laiba's family, especially her sisters, these excuses felt like Abdullah's attempt to evade responsibility responsibility. The inconsistencies in his statements, combined with the marks of violence on Liba's body, left them with little doubt this was not an accident, nor a momentary lapse of control. Her family is convinced that this was a calculated act of cruelty, designed to silence Liba and erase her presence. The heartbreak of her loss is compounded by this conviction, leaving her family to grapple not only with their grief, but with a profound sense of injustice.